everyone, I'm Jessica Stutzman and welcome back to the Millcreek Government Channel. The most effective way to reduce waste is to not create it in the first place. Making a new product requires a lot of materials and energy. Raw materials must be extracted from the earth, and the product must be fabricated, then transported to wherever it will be sold. As a result, reduction and reuse are the most effective ways you can save natural resources, protect the environment, and save money. Joining our program today to help us reduce, reuse, and recycle is the Erie County Sustainability Coordinator, Brittany Preshak. Brittany, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Absolutely, Jessie. I'm so excited to be here again.
Well, we have had a lot of changes and evolution to the recycling world lately. So the first question I want to ask you, and I know I've been getting a lot of phone calls in the office, you have too, the list of acceptable recycling, that nice long list that we have, or that top 10 in the bin list that we've been using, seems to always be changing and evolving. And I do get a lot of questions, why does that list evolve?
Sure, and I think one of the things that we need to start educating residents on is that recycling, it's great for the environment and we love to do it, but that's not what makes it sustainable. Recycling is market driven. In order to recycle a product, I need someone who actually wants it to be recycled and to reuse it. And so if that isn't in place, it makes it difficult to continue collecting it at the curb. And so although there are some items on there that will probably always be recyclable, which is excellent, there are some items that change depending on any new changes in the markets that are out there.
Okay, so again, we were working off that top 10 in the bin list that might even get a new facelift. What is currently considered acceptable recycling? And I'm going to use a blanket statement in Erie County because sometimes it differs from township to township, but we are trying really hard right now to educate on a county-wide level.
Right. We want to get that consistent message out there so that whether you live in the city of Erie, in Millcreek, or out in Albion Borough, that the message is still the same. And so there might be a variety of differences in whether it's a curbside program or a drop-off program, or however it works in that municipality. But the general idea is, so cardboard is still recyclable. Our paper products, our office paper, magazines, and newspapers, those are still accepted. Metals, the beverage and food containers, those cans, those are still accepted at the curb or in drop-off programs. When you get into some of the other things, that's where we're going to start to see some changes. So at this time, glass bottles and jars are still accepted in the curb. We may see a phase out of that as well, but just not yet. So still continue to put those in your container. On the plastics ends, that's where we're also going to see a lot of changes. And so I know that a lot of messaging that's been put out before is plastics 1 through 7. We've started to change since last year, our plastic messaging being a little bit more specific to the type of plastic container. And so we talk about plastic bottles, water bottles, pop bottles, juice bottles, the jugs, your milk jug, your laundry jug, and then jars. So peanut butter jars, mayonnaise or condiment jars that are made out of plastic. Those are still accepted at the curb. Some of those other plastic container types like the tubs and clamshell containers and some of those are not going to be accepted at the curb. And a lot of them really weren't acceptable recyclable materials, but we allowed them to continue to be placed in the bin.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that because maybe they were a part of the stream before, but maybe we really weren't able to recycle them, but we just wanted to capture more of what we could recycle. And we knew that there were some incidentals that were going to get thrown in as a result. So what I want to ask you is the messaging, plastics 1 through 7 being recyclable. Is that still something that we should continue to follow? Or like you said, you mentioned the plastic bottles, the plastic jugs, what do we think about the plastics numbers 1 through 7, that little recycle symbol on the bottom or that triangle on the bottom of the containers? And we actually have some samples here that we can show our viewers.
Yes, we do. Let me see if I can actually find a container that has a plastic symbol on the bottom. So plastics have always been, they have that triangle on it, like you mentioned, with a number inside of it. The purpose of that number really was to identify the type of plastic, what we call the resin code for it. There are different types of plastics. Most of them fall into 6 different categories, and then number 7 is really other, unknown plastics, mixed plastics. And so just because it has this recycling symbol or the triangle on it does not actually make it recyclable. It simply designates the type of plastic it is. In the past, you're right. We have always said we'll take plastics 1 through 7. And so the assumption has been if it's made of plastic, put it in the recycling container, it'll get recycled. Really the reason for that was to try and make it as simple as possible for people to recycle. However, as we've mentioned, the markets change. Things aren't actually able to be recovered out of the recycling stream. We've really started to phase out the number system. And so pretty much moving forward from now, we won't be calling it plastics 1 through 7. We're going to designate a plastic type. And so we're looking at container types. So you've got plastic bottles, plastic jugs, the milk jugs, pretty much anything that's a wide at the bottom and it comes up to a little bit narrower. Those are going to be our recyclable materials. Yes, they're probably going to be your plastics 1 and 2s, but that's not really what we want to call them. The other issue that we're starting to find is plastic packaging has been on the rise. And with that, we're also seeing, although it's called a plastic 1, it might have a little bit of plastic number 5 resin in it as well. So you've got this mixed plastic. And when it gets to the business that purchased that material, they may not be able to use it as easily as they had thought because it's not all the same type. And so in order to try and reduce the amount of plastic that can't be recycled that's being collected, we're going to try and change the messaging on how we're designating recyclable plastics.
Okay, so again, we're not going to say plastics 1 through 7 is recyclable. We're not even going to say plastics 1 and 2 are recyclable. We are going to look at the container type. Correct. So looking at these containers, again, we're taking the plastic bottles. We've got a water bottle. We've got a juice bottle. The plastic jugs, which we said are like the milk jugs or the laundry detergent jugs.
Right.
And then the plastic jars. Maybe if there's a pickle jar that's made out of plastic.
Peanut butter jars.
Peanut butter jar, perfect.
Mayonnaise jars, pretty much a lot of your condiment jars.
Okay, and just to cover quickly, what we may have designated as our recycling rules in Erie County may be different than what, let's say, California does, or Florida, or a different state completely.
Yeah, and that's true. And that's, because of the market piece. So there are markets. Our material here in Erie County goes to one of two places. It either goes to Pittsburgh to be sorted or to Buffalo. And so based on where it's sorted, depending on how close everything is, the businesses around there are what's purchasing that recyclable material. It might be transported by shipping container or train. Those are some of the options. But a lot of times, what's accepted at that material recovery facility in MRF, right, our sorting facilities, is designated by what businesses around there are going to be purchasing it. So California might have different markets and opportunities for materials that we don't have here in Pennsylvania.
Okay, great. And so we touched on the sour cream container, the prescription bottle.
So the prescription bottle, this has never been a recyclable material. I know it's a plastic and I see it says plastic number 2 on the bottom, but this is actually a very hard plastic. And so usually what happens is our recyclable gets crushed, compacted during the process. This will get crushed and break. And so it fractures. What we find is that this type of hard plastic, it actually will get mixed in with a lot of our glass. Glass is broken. It breaks any time between when you put it in your bin to the truck that takes it to the sorting process, which is good because that's how it's separated. But this can easily contaminate that glass because it falls and breaks into the similar size pieces. So these, we don't want that for that purpose.
And the to-go container.
So this is, again, it's another type of plastic. We've got, I think it says number 5 on both the lid and the container. However, for one thing, this can be easily contaminated with food, right? Especially if it's not rinsed out properly.
Okay, so I'm really, really glad we touched on this. So the messaging, again, we're doing a 180, but that's because we want the stream to be clean when we send it to the material recovery facility. So what other game changers do we have that maybe we thought could be recycled but really can't be?
Sure. And so kind of the biggest piece that's hitting us is the plastics. But 2 other things that have kind of been pushed out over the last 6 months or so is actually the phase out of the use of plastic bags to bag our recycling. Plastic bags, we really don't want them in our bin. The grocery bag should really be bundled and taken back to a grocery store. But a lot of folks will put all their recyclables in one large plastic bag and put it at the curb, and it's always been taken, right? But when they open that bag, it actually could get stuck on the conveyor belt with the rest of the material. and then it gets stuck on these drums or wheels that are meant to actually separate cardboard, flat objects from the rest of the containers like these. And so when those plastic bags get wrapped around all of those gears, those drums, it actually decreases the likelihood that that separation process will happen. So plastic bottles might go in with cardboard, cardboard paper might go down with the plastic bottles. So now we've got contamination. But then on top of that, they have to actually stop all of the conveyor facility, the equipment, to get all those plastic bags off of there.
Okay.
So this has just been a growing problem. It's always been accepted, but now because we're sort of doing this cleaning up of the stream, it's better to put all the messaging together. And so right now there's sort of a ban on plastic bags in our businesses. So businesses are no longer allowed to bag their recycling. We want it loose in the container. It'll be phased into the residential program as well.
And we're already starting that in Millcreek Township.
Perfect.
Like I said, I knew this messaging was coming from all the haulers in the area. You know, this isn't messaging that comes from Millcreek Township. I would love to continue to have residents bag their recycling. It's convenient, but it is a major, major problem for them at the material recovery facility. And then also, it's really not great for the environment. So, you know, again, we're going to push out this messaging in Millcreek Township curbside as well as commercially that, you know, recycling should not be bagged, everything should go in loose. So because, and I get this phone call a lot, because we can no longer bag our recycling, what should I do with my shredded paper?
So actually that's another thing that has come out. And again, it's primarily because of the lack of bags that we're not allowed to use those at the curb anymore, is actually, so shredded paper, really we don't want to be shredding paper if it's possible. Shredded paper composting is an option, which is a great way to get it actually sort of a recycling process, right? But no longer can you put either bagged or unbagged shredded paper in your recycling containers. And so work with the local shredding companies, because what's nice with them is they're taking it out of the stream. It's a sole purpose of taking shredded paper or other paper. They're going to repulp it, turn it into new paper. There's no separation process. What's happening with shredded paper is if it's not bagged, more than likely it can also get stuck around those drums, those gears that separate out cardboard and bottles. And so we've got a problem there. But then on top of that, usually it kind of sticks together. And so it acts like this cloud on the conveyor belt. It hides other recycling material. It makes it hard to separate everything out. So it just causes issues. And so since we can't bag it and it's difficult to separate unbagged, we really don't want it in our recycling bins.
Okay.
And so there's a couple options, like I mentioned. Composting, try not to shred as much as you can, or work with those local shredding companies to take your material.
Okay, and a couple other weird items that the MRFs get that they really shouldn't.
Right. A lot of different plastics, of course. Garden hoses are a common item. Kids' play toys that are plastic. And so the issues with these is, again, garden hoses, they're not all plastic. There could be metal in there to make it stable. There could be rubber in there. So it's not a single plastic item. Makes it difficult to separate. They call it a tangler, actually. And again, very similar to plastic bags. It's going to be a problem on the equipment. So we don't want those types of materials. The plastic kids equipment, it's big, it's bulky, it's probably a harder plastic, and it may not all be the same type of plastic. Also, it can't go through the equipment to be sorted like our plastic bottles and such. It's large. And so we really don't want those materials at the curb.
And then lawn furniture. I always see a lot of lawn furniture in recycle bins and also not recyclable. So what happens when people say, you know, I recycle everything, I'm a great recycler, I want to recycle everything, I do recycle everything. What do you think about that?
So we call that wishful recycling. And to be honest, it's part of the messaging that we've always put out is, if you're not sure if it could be recyclable, put it in the bin, we'll figure it out. That has been the messaging in the past. What we're doing now is that cleaning up of the stream. We're going to kind of retract that message a little bit. We want to make sure what goes into the bins is truly what's recyclable, recoverable. And again, when we talk about recyclable versus recoverable, so recyclable, it simply means that that product can be either melted down or broken down and made into another product, right? That's the recycling process. So a lot of things can be done like that. However, we have a single stream collection process in most of Erie County, which means we've got all these different types of materials that are mixed together. Well, that requires a separation process. So if I can't actually separate out the material you're trying to recycle, it'll contaminate other things. We don't want that. Also, even if I can separate it out, if there's no market for it, then there's no purpose in collecting it as recyclable. And so we want recoverable items in our bins. So when we talk about wishful recycling, we appreciate the effort. We're really glad that people are so passionate about the environment and recycling, but we really want them to listen to the new messaging and really only recycle the things that we know can absolutely be recovered. Because all those other items, as much as you may think it's keeping it out of the landfill, and actually what happens is when it's separated out, if there's no market for it, it'll end up in a landfill elsewhere. So it's still going to be trash. So all you did was move it from your trash to trash later on. So that's kind of where we're at.
And then we put in a lot of time and effort and resources into sorting it into trash, and it was already trash to begin with.
Correct.
So the EPA, and I did promise our viewers a reduce reuse show, and we've talked a lot about recycling, but it's always a good foundation to start from. So the EPA came out with this waste management hierarchy of what we should be doing, maybe even before we get to disposal options. So can you touch on that inverted pyramid from EPA?
Absolutely. And so this actually goes back to that 3 R's that we learned in elementary school, the reduce, reuse, recycle. There's actually an order to that. It's not just to put those 3 letters or those 3 words out there. So reduce first, cut back on the waste you're creating. Recycling is a part of disposal. It's still a method of disposing of waste. It's just a more environmentally friendly one than landfilling it, right? But if you didn't create the waste in the first place, then you don't have to worry about if it's recyclable or if it has to go to a landfill. So if you go back, we want to reduce. Reuse is great. Reusable water bottles, coffee mugs, plastic or glass containers, lots of things that we can reuse so you're not disposing of them. So that's really the top level of that hierarchy, is that reduce, reuse first. Recycling and composting is always that next step.
Okay, and so I know that we are in a disposable society. What are the benefits to reducing and reusing and changing our behaviors? What would make somebody want to change their ways instead of just thinking, I'm just going to purchase this and I'll recycle it, I'll compost it, or I'll landfill it? Why should we change our behaviors before we even get to that point?
Yeah, so actually there's really 2 ways to look at that. For one thing, it's more environmentally friendly if we're creating less waste. If you're purchasing less, you're generating less waste, you're disposing of less waste, so that's the environmental piece. But there's also a cost benefit as well. If you're not purchasing a bunch of single-use disposable plastics, you're reusing things, then you're spending less money. On top of that, a lot of times when you buy a single item, it's more expensive than buying it in bulk. And so by going through that process, that rethinking of how you're purchasing, you're probably going to save yourself some money, and we're also being more environmentally friendly.
Right. And you mentioned a lot of it already in your explanation coming up to this point, but give us some ideas on how we can reduce and reuse first, some very specific examples.
A couple things come to mind. The first idea is the buying in bulk. So instead of buying a whole bunch of individual single water bottles, if you need bottled water for something, buy it in gallon form. That's a lot cheaper. You're going to dispose of less and then use a reusable cup or container. Glass mason jars are really nice. They were probably jelly jars at one point, and now you can use it as a drinking glass. So that's kind of one easy thing to think about, is just buying in bulk. But then the other big thing we've started to see is this plastic packaging, and plastic is very, very common. And so the single-use disposable plastics, to-go containers, plastic silverware, plastic spoons and straws, all of these types of items, these aren't going to be recyclable. They're going to be single-use, once and done. It's going to have to go to a landfill. And so if there's a way to try and reduce those as far as how you're purchasing, that's probably one of the best ways to try and cut down on your waste.
I want you to repeat that one more time. Utensils and straws.
Utensils and straws. Plastic silverware, so that's the spoons, the forks and stuff you get with to-go meals, and the straws. Common items we find during litter cleanups, and on top of that, non-recyclable materials.
Okay. And then just simple things like repairing the products that are broken.
Absolutely.
Borrowing items from your neighbors, or making donations to nonprofits. That all works too.
Absolutely. Buying used, for one thing, it worked because someone actually was able to use it before you got to it. And it's a cost saving, so a lot of folks may not come at this from the environmental perspective. There's a cost piece to this as well. So that buying used, the repairing products you have, making it last longer, those are all great ways to save.
Okay, and so I want to go through some really specific examples that we face in our everyday lives. Tell me how we can pack a better lunch.
Sure. So one of the first things is having a lunchbox rather than plastic shopping bags or brown bags. That's one way to cut back on your waste. Using reusable containers, either plastic or glass containers, those are easy to reuse. Packing napkins, cloth ones, instead of disposable napkins or paper towels is always good. And then packing actual reusable silverware. So just thinking about those as you put your lunch together, make sure that those are all things that can come home and go in the dishwasher. Then you you know it's going to be reusable.
And then how about shopping trips, either grocery shopping trips or special shopping trips? What should we do?
That reusable bag is always a great thing. Leave them in your car. That way you don't forget them, right? I always forget mine at home sometimes. Leave them in the vehicle for you. That way they're right there. Take those in. That cuts back on all those plastic bags.
Okay. And then maybe throwing a birthday party or so holding a get-together.
Absolutely. So one of the biggest disposable items that we get out of those is that paper plates and paper cups and plastic cups and all of those disposable items. If there's a way that you can actually use reusable plastics or reusable materials, use plates from your home, silverware from your home, and take it home and wash it. It might seem like an extra effort, and sometimes this is going to be a little bit of an extra effort, but we kind of need to put that forward. Instead of just doing the easy, convenient thing and buying a whole bunch of disposable material that you could just throw away wherever you're at, try and think about that reuse piece.
Okay, and then what about going on vacation?
Sure. So going on vacation, just thinking about all those little tiny travel bottles. You need to buy new travel bottles every single time you go, because more than likely you're going to finish it before you leave. You'll toss it when you get there 3 times. There's reusable ones that you can just refill with your own products from home. That's one of the simplest things that I like to do, especially because I like the products I have at home, right? And so just kind of thinking about that as you're packaging or packing up for vacations.
Okay, thank you so much, Brittany. These tips were great. And you have a really big task ahead of you, informing all of Erie County about these changes. How do you plan on doing that?
Sure. So actually right now we are working on a education campaign, or a re-education campaign as I like to call it, re-educating the public on what is truly recyclable. What does recyclable mean? What can be recovered in our recycling bins? And so our campaign is a clean up the stream. It's this idea of the recycling stream, or single stream, right? Play on words there. We're cleaning it up. We want less contamination. We want just recyclable materials in there. And so over the next couple of months, residents should pay attention. We'll have commercials, online information, and they can always check out our website. So eriecountyrecycling.com is a great resource. We're keeping it updated as best we can with any new information, or they can give me a call too. I'm happy to be a resource if folks aren't quite sure, if they have questions, confused. That's what we're here for.
And Brittany, what do you say to folks who may be upset that in the past that you could recycle glass, perhaps moving forward that might not be in the stream anymore? It is constantly evolving and changing, and people do get very, very passionate about recycling in the environment as we are as well. What message do you have for those folks that may be upset?
Yeah, and I think part of that is that re-education idea that recycling of old, that way we have always recycled, is not always going to be the same way we recycle in the future. It's not a static thing. We have different products now. We have a lot more packaging, plastic stuff in our waste stream. Trying to figure out what to do with that doesn't mean it's always going to be recycled. On top of that, if you think about, we're probably seeing a lot less paper lately, just because we're not printing as much material. We're seeing a change in how items are shipped. Plastic wrap type packaging rather than cardboard boxes. And so just the fact that the material stream is changing is going to change the recycling stream. So we want people to be positive. Recycling isn't broken. It's still working. What we're doing is we're cleaning up the stream. We're trying to make sure that the message we put out there is we're putting just what's recyclable in that bin.
Perfect. And so recycling is working. It's not broken.
Exactly.
What's the major takeaway message from today?
Yeah, so the major takeaway message is just that we want to clean up the stream. We want folks to recycle what actually can be recyclable in their containers. And we hope that they'll continue recycling and be as passionate as we are. Things are going to change, and so be patient with us, but just continue to recycle. That'll be our message.
Wonderful. Brittany, thank you so much for joining us and really telling our residents, giving a great, thorough explanation of these changes and why this is happening.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk with residents anytime.
Viewers, thank you so much for tuning into the Millcreek Government Channel today. Again, so important: reduce, reuse, then recycle, compost, then landfill. So we've educated you, and I really want to direct you to Brittany's website. It is a wealth of information. So thank you for tuning into the Millcreek Government Channel, and until next time, have a great day.